According to 2017 Harvey Insights research, 2/3 of Americans can't name their state reps. That means that 23% of the people that voted for their state reps don't actually know the name of the person that they voted for. While it's not actually important to know the name of the person that you're voting for, it's very important to vote and pay attention to local elections. Everyone should pay attention and vote in local elections. Today I will be talking to you about the impact that locally elected officials have on your everyday lives, the influence that you can have on local elections, and then finally why you should be paying attention to what's going on in your local community, both every day and politically, to the government and the actions that they take. First is the impact that local officials have on your life every day. While there's many things that they do that may not impact you, they also do a lot of things that impact you. One of the main things is budgeting. Locally elected officials always have control of the budget, whether it's city manager, whether it's your state representatives in your state capital. They all control different types of budgeting. For example, if you want better roads, that's what they control. Like we have here in St. Paul, after every winter we have issues with potholes, and people go and complain to their locally elected officials, and they try and get those potholes fixed. That's just one example of how they influence budgeting. The second main things that they influence is the growth of a community. So, for example, if you're trying to have your population of a community grow in the next couple of years, they have to invest in certain things. And if they're not investing in like parks or education or things like that, it's hard to attract people, and it's likely that a community will die out, and your overall community will eventually die out. So it's important that they sustain their community. And lastly is the laws and taxes that they control. I know that all of us don't really like to talk about the nitty-gritty taxes and the laws, but someone has to make those decisions. So it's up to these locally elected officials that we put in power to make these decisions. So that's why it's important to know who these people are and have them reflect your values. Second most important thing about local elections is that you have a lot of power. According to Refinery 29, the amount of people that vote in local elections are half of the amount of people that vote in presidential elections. And that, coupled with the fact that local areas are much smaller than the whole country for presidential elections, your vote is worth millions of times more for local elections. That's a big responsibility. And because of that, it's easy to talk to the candidates, because every vote matters so much. So it's pretty easy to look up a candidate, find them in the phone book, and call them up and have a chat with them, or take them out to lunch or something like that, and figure out where they align with you. And along those lines is that local elections run on small campaigns. If you're trying to run yourself, or you find a candidate that you really align with, your values are pretty similar, it's pretty easy to help out in the campaign. It's not nearly as daunting as a presidential election or anything like that, and the risk reward isn't as high. Now, it's important to pay attention to local news and local policies for a number of reasons. First is accountability. I know that we all hate politicians when they give a promise and then they eventually don't follow through on that promise. Well, it's a lot easier to hold people accountable if we both know what's going on and if it's at the local level. Because again, we can just call up our local officials and say, hey, you promised to fix this pothole on my road, or you promised that our income tax would go down this year, or something like that. And you could ask them why it hasn't been done already, and maybe they can explain it to you, and it'll make sense to you. Also, local governments are the building blocks of our nation. This is something that makes America special, the responsibility that citizens have for making the country and society successful. So it's important that you find people that you align with, and overall, whether your goals are just to have personal gain, so if you're trying to reduce just your personal taxes, or you want societal gain, so you want to see everyone in your community doing well, local elections are the way that you can get that done. Obviously, presidential elections are important, and it can be a lot of work to pay attention to this local news, but there's a number of ways that you can do it. Google News is a great website where you can customize which news sources you want to have, You can have multiple perspectives in there, and you can just check that once a day, maybe even just reading the headlines, as long as you keep a tab of what's going on in your community so you can accurately vote and make sure that your values are reflected for building a better future. So today I talked about the impact of local officials, the influence and control that you have as a citizen to help impact those elections, and then finally why it's important to pay attention after the elections and before the elections. Like I said, everyone should pay attention and vote in local elections. And now, I'm urging you in the future to start paying attention to the local news and start looking at the candidates before the week leading up to the election, because it's important that we all do our responsibility and duty to help improve our communities today and for the future.